Ron Feldman is our mastermind behind this program and is the one who helped us really put it together. He's one of the world's renowned and most masterful people involved with franchising, and we'll let you guys take it from here.
We lost one of our panelists. You'll see a fourth person there, Rocco Fiorentino, who got stuck in Atlanta and was unable to attend. I guess this is not on. We can turn it. Now it's on. Okay. I am the Chief Development Officer at ApplePie Capital. We do franchise financing nationally for about 100 brands. And we're going to do a little bit of back and forth. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So I'd like to start with someone out there tell me what your favorite franchise is.
Be careful now.
Yes. Chick-fil-A. That is a quasi-franchise. We're going to explain to you, because you said that, what Chick-fil-A's model is. Yes? Orange Theory, the hottest fitness franchise in all of franchising. We've got about 100 of those that we've lent money to. Anyone else? No one else has a favorite for, yes? Sweet Green. Is that a franchise, Wayne? I don't think that's a franchise. I think that's all corporate owned, but we'll talk about the difference. Anyone else? Give me one more. Chipotle is not a franchise. Wendy's. Okay, Wendy's. All right, Jackie, you're going to not talk to her anymore? No, okay. To my right is Lane Fisher of FisherZucker. Their office is around the corner. Lane, why don't you talk a little bit about what your practice is?
Sure. So for being lucky or smart, we got involved in franchising about 25 years ago. I've had the really good fortune to be probably more at the right place at the right time, but franchising has sort of taken off as a method of doing business and not dependent on any particular industry. It's applicable to almost all industries. So as a method of doing business and a method of expansion, and sort of grown its own legs and grown even faster than we have. So we have 14 lawyers that do nothing but franchise-related stuff. We represent mostly people on the franchisor side that are looking to franchise or that are existing franchisors. Our biggest client by dollar volume is Subway, and we've had the good fortune and privilege to work with a lot of the local franchisors. I tell the story about bringing I think it was draft 1 or 2 of the Rita's Water Ice document to the founder, Bob Tumalo, at a very modest home compared to what he lives in today. And Philly Pretzel Factory, when I met with them on the first day, the first question that they asked me after I was sure I had a secure place to park my car was whether I wanted orange or red. I didn't exactly know what that meant, but they were giving me my choice of milk crate to sit on, which is where they had business meetings before they started. So just really great experience working with a lot of those companies, Hand and Stone Massage and other people that have been local, but franchising is a national type business. The folks with expertise are spread out generally, and so our practice has expanded and become really one of the national practice. We probably have, there's a big regulatory anniversary on April 30th, and that's a time when you think about how many clients you have, but I think we figured out that we had some 400 and something franchisor clients that were active and selling franchises, which we're very proud of and very good, hopefully, at doing this, because we don't do anything else. And then, of course, being involved in the trade association and sort of trying to keep your eye on the legal and legislative landscape, and I'll let Jack speak to it more directly, because I think he has more a direct victim of such things. But part of our responsibility as lawyers or as professionals in the business is try to keep an eye on what happens on Capitol Hill and what happens in the various state houses. And Jack, Ron, we've all been very busy on Capitol Hill trying to deal with, I'm sure, proposed legislation that has at its core some good purpose of somebody's, but along the way gets very damaging. And again, I'll leave that to Jack. But so, we're totally immersed and entrenched. I don't know if I do anything else. If you slip on a banana peel, I have to send you elsewhere. But if you do something with franchising or something with small business or something with expanding or scaling a business that has as its nucleus a trademark, that's our thing.
So, Lane, I don't know if you know this, but there are 4,000 active franchise brands. So you've got a 10% market penetration. That's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing. Jack, why don't you talk a little bit about your background and how you got to McDonald's?
I started as a commercial banker. Out of college, started working for Fidelity Bank, now Wells Fargo, through, there's probably about 6 iterations in between. But as a commercial banker, I was responsible my group was responsible for business west of Pittsburgh as a regional bank. Most of our business, of course, on the East Coast. So we divided the country at Pittsburgh. I think we're the only bank that ever divided anything at Pittsburgh. Involved in corporate clients, was involved in the Chrysler bailout with Lee Iacocca, and by far the most charismatic man I ever met. McDonald's was one of my clients. I lectured on banking and financing for them at Harvard University. I got to know all the right people, and then went in one day and said I want to become a franchisee, and they said, fine, good, you're in. That's really how it all happened. What was my reasons? Wanting to own my own business. Franchising offered me the opportunity to be in business by myself, but not, for myself, but not by myself. But through all of that, it was really about the money. And it was just about the money. I used to finance some of these guys before I started on the corporate side, some of the local franchisees, and they're making a lot more money than I was. So I said, oh, this looks a hell of a lot better than what I'm doing. So that was really the reason that I decided to go see the right people at Corp and ask to become a franchisee. So what are some of the biggest challenges for someone coming out of corporate America into owning your own small business? And we really are, and I think that's the critical piece. We are small businessmen and women. And when you look at how to run a business, as a small businessman or woman, you wear all hats. And I think that's the big difference. You know, HR. As a small businessman, I don't have an HR department. I have an office. And they do many things in the office. Some of it's HR. HR is handled also at the restaurant locations. Training obviously is a big part of what we need to do in building our business. You know, accounting. I deal with my own accountant, but on a regular basis, the bill paying, running the balance sheet, making sure that you're controlling your labor, controlling your food costs, and making the profits that you believe that you need to generate to run a profitable business. Relationships with your providers, your M&R providers, because equipment does break down and breaks down often, unfortunately. The biggest challenge, I think, though, is hiring and retaining good employees. That is the key for any small business person. I guess it is for any business, but it's really critical. As I said, we don't have an HR department, so we need to make sure that myself and my supervisor, along with my GMs, are constantly working with our people to provide the best service that we can to our consumer, as well as making sure that we meet their needs as employees. I have 300 employees, 6 GMs, 300 total employees, 6 GMs, 1 supervisor, and an office manager. 4 of those 7 folks have been with me 30 years, 2 20 years, 1 15 years, and 1 40 years. That 40 years is my daughter, and today's her birthday. Good one.
So, before we get into the industry stuff, I just want to ask, and I didn't ask Jack this question, and I don't know the answer, which I usually don't do on panels, but of your 300 employees, how many of them are minimum wage, and how long does somebody stay at minimum wage until they're either get a raise or move out?
Very, very few. Our average wage usually runs $3 to $4 higher than minimum wage. And in today's market, and I was going to talk about this a little later, in today's market, you know, when you have unemployment at 3.4, I believe it is right now, that's what I said, training and maintaining and keeping your good people is critical to your business.
So what I'm going to do, I'll just give you a little bit of my background. I started in franchising as a franchisee with my wife. We owned a Goddard School franchise, which is another Philly-based franchise that was started by a guy by the name of Anthony Martino. You might know a couple of the other brands he started: Amco, Anthony A. Martino Company, and Mako, Martino A. Anthony Company. He liked his name a little bit. He's long gone now, but he also started the Goddard School franchise, and we were very early in that system. Opened one, ran it for 10 years. We actually opened it so we could get free kindergarten for Rebecca back in the day, and then it took us 3 years to open from a real estate standpoint, because getting real estate for that business was very difficult. And of course, she was already in first grade when we opened, so greatest plans never work out. Franchising as a business model, when people talk about it being an industry, it's actually 200 sectors that comprise franchising. Everyone thinks franchising is food. When I asked the poll, I got a bunch of non-food brands. 50% of franchising is food, and 50% is not food. There's 733,000 businesses nationally, 7.5 million jobs directly in franchising, 13.3 because of franchising. Think about what franchising generates in terms of the real estate folks, the attorneys, the accountants, the finance companies that are all aligned to franchising. Output for the total business model, 1.6 trillion and almost $1 trillion of GDP. That's pretty significant to anyone who looks at anything on a macro basis. 76%, and this is right from the International Franchise Association website, 76% of people in America have a favorable opinion of family-owned franchises. If you look at just the state of Pennsylvania, and you can see that there's a lot of advocacy going on because everything's broken down this tightly. 27,000 franchise locations in Pennsylvania, 270,000 jobs, 14.5% of GDP, and Pennsylvania voters actually have a higher view of franchising by a small margin than they do nationally. And then I just picked, just to show off the IFA's software, I live in Congressional District 13. Who here knows what congressional district they live in? Nobody? You should. If you don't, you really should, because the only way that we have power is by influencing our local politicians, who can then influence our other politicians, and we're going to spend some time on advocacy. But even in District 13, $681 million of the GDP in my congressional district, which, by the way, I don't know who drew this map, but the darker green, it goes from 95, goes from 95 all the way to Lansdale. You think about a cross-section of people, you've got everyone, the blue-collar union folks in Mayfair, all the way out to Lansdale in one congressional district that will be redrawn again, because that's what they do. But the IFA actually measures everything, and the reason for that is we have a very strong advocacy for the business model. In 2018, the forecast is that GDP is going to grow in franchising at 6.1%. Now, what's the latest number nationally on the economy? 3? Is that what we're hearing, Jack? 3? 3% GDP growth right now nationally. So franchising is growing at double the GDP growth of the country. And can you imagine the country if we had 6% GDP growth? You would have surpluses everywhere. You'd also have high inflation if that happened. This is just a poll of all voters across party lines. Where do you ever see something where 76% of Democrats and 79% of Republicans agree on something? And certainly not in Washington. That's never possible. But it's really a business model that everyone...
But as a business model that's used as a vehicle for independent business people, regular folks like you and me, the problem when you are such a significant impact of anything is that you are the the target of folks. And unfortunately, it's the baby and bathwater analogy, in that the franchisees, who are just regular folks owning a business that they follow some business model, are grouped in with like big box retailers. And if you take people's perception of whether they like them, or 76 people agree on this, what they don't agree is on what, you know, liability or obligation or burden should be shared by that kind of small business people. Because there's a very convenient way to switch the definition over when you're looking for somebody who can afford it. When a lot of times in these large numbers, it looks like you have a deep pocket. It turns the heat, which is maybe properly or usually directed toward big box retailers, and turns it to franchisees. It's an unfortunate circumstance and odd, and just really exists on Capitol Hill more than elsewhere.
It exists at the federal level more than anything else, and Jack's been on the front lines with it, and we'll talk a bit about that as well.
Can I start with a question? Because I think that people, I get the same question, Sweetgreens and Honeygrow. People say to me, I want those franchises. They say, well, they're not franchises. And there's a lot of confusion around even really entrenched people about what is or is not a franchise. And so it would help, I think, for 1 second. So look at Honeygrow and Sweetgreens do share, I think, in news sources, their volumes. And they're dramatic. They are higher than most other, you're looking at me funny, but you're the guy that knows numbers better than me. But they perform better than most other things in the segment. And franchising is driven by profitability, regardless of what anybody else says, branding and profitability. If you're extremely profitable, you have sources of funds, just like if you have a business that is profitable. And if you are not profitable, or you're less profitable, you are less appealing, but still represent a good business opportunity. So people often try to hoard it for themselves, especially if it's a highly performing business, until what? Until they are overwhelmed generally with either the burden or the infrastructure of trying to run them. That's what burns people out. That's why I hear people say, what drives me to it, if I have an unlimited source of capital in a capital market, or a sweetheart investor that'll fund anything that I'm going to open, I probably don't franchise, because I don't need to. And then if I have a business opportunity where you see other people that are, let's say in startups that are starting up all over the country, you have a window that's going to open or close, and it's going to open faster than you could take down real estate and build locations if you have a real estate-based business. So you're almost forced to scale using other people's resources, money and operational skill, and that is what I think drives people. Honeygrow doesn't franchise now. They have an unlimited source of capital, but they may franchise in places someday that are further or harder to manage or harder to do. Do you?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, if you're a franchisee, there's two things that you're paying for, a brand and a system. That's what you're paying your money for. And to put it in Jack's term, you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. You're getting the infrastructure, the brand protections, and sometimes you don't like them. When we were a Goddard franchisee, twice a year, unannounced, someone from Goddard would show up, and it was QA, quality assurance visit. And they had a 14-page checklist, and they went through literally every baby bottle to make sure they were labeled properly, and everyone's suntan lotion to make sure that it wasn't expired. And while you were there, you hated them. But when they left and you got a good score, you say, you know what? This brand really cares about brand standards. And that's something that is very important to the business model. So in the corporate world, in the Chipotle world, that is a different thing, because they've got tens of thousands of employees. When you look at McDonald's, I don't know how many corporate restaurants McDonald's runs now. Very few.
In the States, it's less than 3%.
3% of the restaurants, and the average McDonald's franchisee, if you divide the number of units by the number of franchisees, I think is 6 or 7.
It's right on
5. So you think about McDonald's as being this behemoth company. Well, it is, because they own, if you watch the movie, they own all the real estate. But the average franchisee has 5 restaurants and a couple of hundred employees. That's not a big business. Yet everybody goes after them as though they are. So it's a challenge business model. Yes?
This is kind of a side, I'm just wondering this. If you took out McDonald's and the biggest franchises in terms of what it would cost to buy a franchise, what's the average price of a franchise?
It really depends on whether you're doing a brick and mortar or you're doing a territory-based franchise. The territory-based franchises average under 200,000 because you're not building anything out. The average inline brick and mortar food business to build is 300 to 500,000, all in, all costs. And then when you get to the pad sites, you're into the millions. A freestanding building, a McDonald's. Yeah. Yes. We want this to be interactive. We don't want to be talking heads.
So I'm curious, I come to you, I've got, I own Rita's Water Rice, it's a franchise, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, and I own 2 or 3 locations here in Philadelphia. I come to you and say, so I want a franchise. One, how do you vet? I'm sure you're courted by people that want a franchise constantly. What's some of the criteria? And number 2, what does it cost to roll out a franchise? Like, what am I going to look at as an investment?
So I can.
So two parts. Questions that you use to vet somebody, because every concept's not franchisable, I'm sure. And you're going to say, it cost me 50 grand or whatever.
So the vetting occurs, it's really like a profitability analysis. If somebody walks you in something that's losing money saying, I want to franchise this so someone else can figure out how to make it great, that really never works. So it is typically going to be an analysis of what you have by way of pilot locations that are similar or substantially similar to what you would propose franchising, and what unique metrics there are. There are people that come in and they're like, there's some people that come in, they want you to taste the yogurt. So you know there's no money in that one, right? So then there's others that come in that just have a poor context in terms of what's good. And so often what you see is, I can tell you what the best is. When you have your 4 at 3 Ritas or whatever you're doing with no other operators and no other people operating units, they're going to operate. The 3 you have in the single market that have been around for a while are going to be the best performers. When you average other units in, you're going to average down, right? Because they're going to be new in new places with people that aren't you. So we're going to look at your businesses, see if they're substantially similar, see if it relates that you're making personal appearances at all 3 and you're something special about you. But most industries have comps, whether they're food comps or whether they're dryer vent cleaning comps or whatever it might be, or similar investment level comps, and you're just trying to see what the lift is in terms of risk-reward proposition. Because the more people will be interested if it costs $100 to build and you do $1 million in your first year, 10-time return on your initial investment in the first year. And there's lots of different measures that have evolved in different parts of the restaurant and other service parts of the industry. But you try to get your arms around whether you have something good or delicious yogurt, right? Delicious yogurt is something we can have for $1 and you don't have to go forward. So now I come in and I see, all right, so I have a very compelling business model. I have some really edge on food cost and I have some major edge on labor, right? What else is there in a restaurant, right? Food, labor, occupancy. Otherwise, it's your space. So right then you're going to mess around with that. So you're going to vet it in that way and you're going to compare it to comps that you help people identify and exist. Franchisors are permitted but not required to disclose they're called financial performance representations, and their information about how the current franchisees or existing operators perform. And so you can get those. They're matters of public record. You can get them either for cost or for free, and you lay them out, and it's not a magic. It's like you're way better than them. It's usually what we find is that your business that you control all aspects of, that reports all its income, performs better than what else we're looking at. And then you see, well, these people sell 3-packs and 4-packs, and they sell multiple units to a single individual, and they're hot, right? So, and we make twice as much as them. So that's like kind of how you do the vetting. Like, do I have a better or worse business opportunity? How much capital do I have? How easy or hard will it be for me to get leads? So Rita's Water Ice, for the first 10 years, didn't pay 1 penny for leads. All they did was reject people. And when you reject people constantly, all it does is make them want it more. And people used to call and beg them for it. They would get 2 or 3 deposits behind, they were looking for real estate, and the real estate guys in the room know that. And it's not a big number and it may take you a while to cite those. And they would say, we're not interested in taking anymore. Well, nothing creates it down. So if you have 0 cost for generating leads, let me tell you how promising that is as a franchise opportunity versus Ron and I starting, Lenny's Hot Dogs or something that was good at some time and then trying to convince people that they should want to join us in this business opportunity. So there's a lot of vetting, there's a lot of context as you try to figure out what's good. And then there's always sometimes I look you in the eye and like, you're not a people person, and this franchise thing is very people intensive, and they don't work for you, and they have their own investment and their own business, and you're going to need to, have a personality for it. Some people in 2 seconds don't have the personality, and some people you see They're like the coaches and the people that just come from that realm. They are good for it, right? And then the question is, what skill set do you have versus what skill set you'll have to bring on from the outside? I don't want to go on and on, but that's the way you do it. No magic, and it all revolves around the business opportunity. And smart franchisors changed the name of these people that came in and checked your bottles for the right labeling to directors of franchisee profitability, right? Recognizing that all anyone cares about is making money, and if you're making money, you're probably okay with everything else. If you're not making money, you want to tweak everything in the business model, right? Because you're discontent and you think you can fix it, as opposed to it just being you license the system and you follow this system, as opposed to then re-engineering and reinventing it. Do you have any other?
I think you did.
So let me just stick with Rita's for a second.
And just the other
Yeah.
part of this is, I'm sure the cost of rolling out a franchise in the food business is different than in the service business, right? So, I come to you or I send somebody to you and I'm going to say, listen, if you don't have 50 grand, 100, whatever that number is, don't think about it.
So it depends. Everyone asks that question too, right? If you come to me and say, Lane, I want to open 100 in 1 year, first I'll try to talk you out of it, and then I'll try to send you to somebody else, because you're one of these people that's not going to get franchising. But if you say you want to do 100 in a year, people are going to expect you to have much higher capitalization. There are 15 states that require pre-sale review and approval before you're allowed to sell in those states, and what do you think they look at? Capitalization. Now, if you have real estate, it takes you 6 months or a year to find a spot, versus a dryer vent business or a mobile cleaning business where you're in business one day after you complete training. Like that one is much more scalable, and one takes longer and requires more capital. So it is an analysis that you make on a case-by-case basis. The regulatory compliance aspect, the part people pay lawyers, is about a $25,000 endeavor for all in with, multi-unit deals and guarantees and all that kind of stuff. And then, if you add, the one beautiful thing about franchising is it's highly regulated, but you can change it through changes to an operations manual that you can change from time to time, and franchisees must follow. It's very liberal, but it requires you to have one. An operations manual might, if you have great materials to start with and great training materials, it would be less than if you didn't, but it might be $10,000 or $20,000 to do that. But that's a minimum. You have no leads, you have no people working for you, and you'd have to have some plan on how you'd either recapitalize or mine your current opportunities for cash.
If you're thinking about franchising your business, if anyone is, there's a book out called Grow Smart, Risk Less. Grow Smart, Risk Less, by Shelley Sun, who is the past chair of the IFA. And so, but if anyone's interested in doing that, that's the book you want to read. I just on Rita's, and then we'll move on to the rest of the questions. Rita's went through a real tough spot, as did everyone, but they went in 2008. But in 2006, Rita's moved out of the Philly market in a big way. And they went to Atlanta, Georgia, and they went to the Carolinas, and they went to Virginia, and everybody said, what's water ice? No one knew what it was. But their fans from Philly that moved there wanted to be franchisees. And if you've ever looked at the evolution of the name of the company, it's now Rita's Ice Custard Happiness. Water ice doesn't exist, but if we're in a room of Philadelphians, we talk about Rita's Water Ice. So you also have, they also took on real estate that they should have never taken on. They took on strips, Rita's does well in Philly in third generation repurposed real estate. It doesn't do well trying to sell $1 million worth of water ice out of an inline place with 30 seats. So there's a lot of scalability issues, and you really need to have your experts in line. I don't know who said it, but the line of I turn founders into CEOs. We have a thing in franchising called founder syndrome, where it's time for you to hire a CEO and get out of the way of your own business. That's very common in franchising. So Jack, since Lane's monopolized, and the two Jewish guys have monopolized the microphone, I'm just saying.
It's all anti-Gentile.
You bring a very unique perspective, and this is a Philly audience. You run restaurants in the city, and you run restaurants out of the city, in 2 states. Can you just speak to the differences in being an operator in multiple states and in the city and out of the city?
Yeah, you have to meet with more legislators. And that tends to be the challenge. And you even talked about that a little bit earlier, and I think it's so important. The people that are on the other side of the issue, they're meeting with those legislators. So if you're not meeting with those legislators, your voice is not being heard. And I think that's the most critical piece. You know, on the federal side, there's a lot that we deal with right now from a small businessman's perspective, a woman's perspective. ADA law, all that we need to do to comply with ADA, 2% grades on your parking lots, lots of little different things. Just I-9 forms, making sure your people are completing an I-9 form correctly. Today, with everything you see about immigration, it's even more important that as a small businessman, you're complying with I-9 requirements. Unemployment compensation, making sure that you're following up on that properly. Licenses, the number of licenses that are required from all the different agencies. The state of Pennsylvania, there's not a lot that's affecting us right now. There's, you know, minimum wages possibly might come up, but I don't see that coming up right for a while. They actually have a bill in place right now to possibly deal with the Philadelphia soda tax, and I'll talk about that a little bit later when I talk about Philadelphia. In New Jersey, my New Jersey restaurants, we have a new governor, and the governor has said that he's increasing the minimum wage to $15. You can't take minimum wage, you can't double minimum wage and keep business operating properly and profitably. What ends up happening, if you increase minimum wage to 15, that's your base. What about all the people that are being paid now $3, $4, $5, $6, $7 over base? You have to move all of them. So that's a huge issue. Does minimum wage have to go up? Yeah, it does, but it needs to go up in a gradual way that business can absorb it, and that the people that are benefiting from the minimum wage, they're not losing their jobs because jobs are being lost if minimum wage goes up too fast. So that's an issue in New Jersey. Paid sick leave is also going to happen in New Jersey. So just something we have to live with, something new to deal with. The issue right now for me is my one restaurant in Philadelphia. There's so much in Philadelphia that's happening. This soda tax, you see it on the news, people, ABA fighting it, and it's expensive, and it taxes one particular item. To give you an example, I have 2 stainless steel tanks in my restaurant that hold Coca-Cola syrup, 75-gallon tanks. Truck comes, plugs into the side of the building, fills the tank up. Cost me $143 to fill that tank up. I pay the city of Philadelphia $800 and some odd in soda tax. That's not right. So, I mean, that's what we're dealing with. That's what we're fighting on the soda tax.
And is that different for an independent? Are any of those things you talked about different?
What do you mean?
The regulation.
Oh, no, everybody pays that. Anyone that sells, and it's Diet Coke, it's all soft drinks, so every grocery store has to deal with it. A good friend of mine owns a number of grocery stores in the city of Philadelphia. He's got 3,000 items, he told me, that are affected by the soda tax.
Has anybody, I went through in McDonald's drive-through, of course it was McDonald's,
Thank you.
and I got a large Diet Coke, because they're all $1, right? They have this thing, soda, all beverages $1. The soda tax was 45 cents on a large Diet Coke. So 45% tax, and who's buying sodas at McDonald's? Not, how many people here bought a soda at McDonald's in the last 5 years? Last five months? I don't see many hands. It's
What do you drink with your McDonald's?
poor people. No, I'm just saying, it's a tax on poor people. That's what it is. This soda tax makes absolutely no sense.
So we're dealing with, and that's just one issue that we're dealing with. But right now we're dealing with another issue that's being brought up, and it is, I think, very damaging that we're trying to figure out how to deal with it. And it's called predictive scheduling. And again, it really just targets our industry for the most part. Schedules have to be posted 2 weeks in advance. I can live with that. Right now, we post them a week in advance. It's not a major deal. But almost guaranteeing hours, penalties to be paid if schedules are changed. In most cases, our people, if we have, and this affects young people too, so if you have a 16-year-old, how many 16-year-olds do you know that they know exactly what they're doing 2 weeks from now? So it's a big issue, and the biggest part of this problem is compliance and all the paperwork that's going to be associated with it. I know they have it up in New York City, and it's just targeted to our industry, the QSR industry, quick service restaurant industry. So it's targeted, and that's where a lot of the problems that we face come in. We dealt with it in Seattle and some of the legislation out there that they specifically targeted a particular industry as opposed to the entire business community. So those are the big issues now that we're facing as small business people.
Yes?
So how do you handle when you have lots of employees, like 16-year-olds, who that's their first job, right? And you have, probably 100 of them, right? So how do you handle quality assurance for them and to even teach them what it's like to have a job since it's their first one?
Well, it's all part of your training. We spend a lot of time on training. We're redoing all our training facilities within the restaurant. More computerized training because they identify better with the computerized training. So, and again, any business is only going to be as successful as good as the people you have working for you. So, at times they're challenging. Some of the kids are great, and I get kids, not kids anymore. I've been in business 30-some years. That come back and say hi and remind me that I employed them in 1985, 86. So that part of it, it's rewarding from my perspective, talking to these young people. I spend a lot of time talking to my crew and people, making sure they understand that I understand what's important to them, or I try to understand what's important to them. Doesn't mean I do it all times, but I try to do that. And I think anyone in small business today really needs to have a good relationship with their people, young people, and it's just not your young people. A lot of your full-time people, what we call our day staff that have been with you a long, long time, making sure you understand what's important to them. How does their personal life, how does their job interfere with their personal life? If in fact it does, with children and such. So bottom line, it's hands-on.
Well, one of the other things that I've just read a statistic that in Domino's Pizza, 89% of the franchisees started as hourly workers. That's a pretty amazing statistic if you think about it. And in McDonald's, a lot of the franchisees are also started working in the restaurant.
More than a third of the McDonald's franchisees today started as crew.
If you're buying a franchise, what should you expect as the net profit, not gross profit, but net profit to you when you're evaluating a franchise? This is before you're paid.
Before I'm paid, I always want to see what it is when I'm paid.
Yeah.
You look at unit economics, in any franchise, you've got to, and you were talking about it earlier, Lane, you're looking at unit economics. What kind of economics is that generating, and can you duplicate it? When I looked at going from one store to my next restaurant, and then I had to build in some management to help me do that, I have to look at, what's the cost of and what's the bottom line I'm going to get after I increase the size of my organization from a labor standpoint, as well as, am I going to be able to finance that new unit and still generate sufficient cash for me?
But you're expanding. Let's say somebody who's just buying the franchise for their first time, because essentially they're buying themselves a job, right? And then if they're lucky, they can do what you've done, which is expand beyond that. And your business is different. It's based on a volume business. And so the percentage might not be as much, but at the end of the day, you'll still collect a nice chunk of change. But for somebody who's buying a franchise for the first time, what should they be looking at?
It depends on the brand. The good news about franchising is it's highly regulated. So in every franchise brand, there's a document called the franchise disclosure document that Lane authors for many brands. One of the items or chapters is item 19, which is financial performance representations. That is an average, you got to read the fine print of what some do gross, some do net, some do none. But when we bought our Goddard school, we actually went and visited with 10 other franchisees and asked them those questions. And that's what you have to do. You must do your diligence with other franchisees if you're looking to become a franchisee to see what their net is. Because the only thing the brand can tell you is what's in that document, nothing more.
I've heard successful multi-unit operators suggest that they're looking for a 25% cash-on-cash return. Today, people look at how quickly you recoup the initial investment in terms of a multiple of gross sales. Does it take 1 year? Do you make it back 10 times? Like, there are some recognized measures that folks who are experienced and look at these things will look at to try to evaluate it. And there's benchmarking in every business. If you pick a business like Pet Supplies Plus that we both represent, it's a big operation. It takes sometimes 2 years to get a return on your investment, and that's not bad. In fact, the return is great. But if you only have 12 months of staying power, it's a terrible investment for you because you can't withstand the cash flow. So it just depends, and it depends on the level of investment, the magnitude of investment. I hear people say all the time, these businesses that don't have an office and that just drive around are the easiest to make money at, and then you hear other people that want brick and mortar that say that, that they want to go the longer haul and wait out a larger return.
You have to decide if you want to buy a job or you want to build an empire first. And there's a big difference. There's buy a job franchises, there's certain franchises that are buy a job, and there's others that are build an empire. And we're going to wrap up and we'll stay for a few minutes after, but I want to talk about an event. If anyone's interested in becoming a franchisee or franchising their business, there's an event September, the day after Yom Kippur. September 21st.
You had to say that.
And it's the day after. You're free. It's all good.
It
The
was
day
very
after.
congested in this instance.
It's the day after, and the Thursday and Friday after Yom Kippur. It's called the Springboard for Emerging Franchisors. Lane and a bunch of great folks run it. They tolerate me helping them plan it.
But it's across the street at the Westin.
It's at
in
the
Liberty
Westin
Place.
here. It's in Philly. If that's something you have interest in doing, we have some flyers here, and anybody can attend if that's where
If
they
you have
want.
folks that are looking who are actively exploring franchising, it's like an amazing opportunity to walk a couple blocks and get around people that have been in the business a lot, and are way far ahead a lot, to try to get people's perspective. So we would invite folks to that, and if they can make it.
And if you want to become a supplier to franchising, you should, we're both past chairs of the supplier board. There's the right way and the wrong way to do it, and we're happy to tell you the right way to do it. So.